Hello, welcome to TMI, Torah, Marriage, and Intimacy with me, Lauren Hofstatter. I am so excited to introduce you guys to Dr. Talli Rosenbaum. She is a licensed marriage and family therapist, certified sex therapist, and internationally recognized educator specializing in sexual health, intimacy, and relationships. She is known for her compassionate, evidence-based approach and her ability to bridge clinical expertise with cultural and religious sensitivity. Dr. Rosenbaum is a co-author of A Guide to Intimacy and Desire and has trained professionals and educated communities around the world on fostering healthy and fulfilling intimate relationships. Welcome, Dr. Rosenbaum.
Thank you. And thank you for the honorary PhD, which I never actually got.
Oh, really? Are you
Just call me,
kidding
yeah, I'm not a, no. So just call me
me?
Tali, that's fine. People mistake me for doctor because I do have a list of publications for fun,
It
apparently,
happens to be
because,
I'm defending my PhD in like 3 weeks, and I used one of yours as part of for my dissertation. One of your
okay,
publications. I
good
don't
for
remember
you.
which one, but I did use it. Yeah,
Good for
that's
you.
so funny. Oh wow,
So
interesting.
just to correct, just for transparency, I get
For sure,
introduced a lot as doctor, and I always feel a little bit impostery because of that. It's
because you're
just
not right.
not
I get it. Perfect.
factual.
Perfect. No
But
problem.
thank you. Thank you for having me on your podcast. I see you on Instagram. You're
Mhm.
amazing on Instagram. It's something
Thank you
I've
so
never
much.
quite picked up the talent for. Um,
Mhm.
Good for you. Good
Thank you.
for
I
your
appreciate it.
content.
Okay, so today we are going to be talking about a super hot topic that has been all over my Instagram almost since I've started, and that is the concept of homosexuality. So, for clarity's purposes, there is because a lot of what I talk about, Tali, is because you've seen my Instagram is bridging Torah and Torah and intimacy, sexuality related things. So we do know that homosexuality is a conflict in terms of halacha. We are aware of that. That's not what we're here to talk about today. We're here more so to talk about what do we do now because it's happening. You know what I'm saying? And unfortunately, there are many other things that people are doing that also do not align with Torah values. They're still happening. So this happens to be a pretty big one in from what I'm seeing. So that's really why I wanted to have you because this is something that I know that a very nice, a tremendous amount about. So that's why I need some guidance from you.
I'm happy. Look, the truth is that I'm really no particular expert in this specialized area. I do work with couples. I, like you, also have a podcast called Intimate Judaism, where we also deal with issues of Jewish life, Jewish philosophy, Jewish values with intimacy and sexuality and relationships. So we have also done a couple podcasts on this issue, which definitely, as you said, it's one that can bring up conflict and one that really needs to be talked about. Is a certain percentage of individuals are not straight, and they're somewhere along the LGBTQ spectrum. And in Jewish Orthodox life, there needs to be kind of a communal way, not only an individual way, not only a therapeutic way, but just also a way to deal with this communally, which is happening. It's starting. I know
Right.
that you're familiar with Horowitz's work and Rob Renner. So the conversations are beginning to be out there so that people who are not straight and do value their Judaism, their orthodoxy, can feel less alone, less othered, less marginalized, more understood.
Right. For sure.
Answering questions just by saying that the reason why it's so important to talk about this and to raise awareness. And I think that people who are listening, most likely there's going to be a spectrum of people, and there are going to be people who are, nogea b'davar. They're actually dealing with this, living with this. They have someone in their family, or they themselves are dealing with this. But then I think it's really important to look at the Orthodox communities large and how do we treat, how do we include, how do we not other people who are not straight? How do we include them in our communal spaces? How do we act towards them? So So that's why I think it's important that we have a broad conversation that everybody's invited to listen to. I do also want to start by saying that, the issue itself, as you said, is a real conflict for people. Generally speaking, when you are born and raised Orthodox and you live a halachic life, the messages that you will have heard about homosexuality are generally quite negative. And people don't choose to be homosexual. And so when they kind of begin to go through their developmental process and recognize this about themselves, um, it can become something that can be a great source of conflict, a great source of anxiety, a source of shame. And it's really, really important to factor in, like you said before, we're not going to be talking about the halachic aspects, but in fact, we can't ignore that you're, in a biopsychosocial world, in a model that appreciates all the different factors that go into situations, whether they're biological, physiological, psychological. We also look at the sociological. We look at how person, society, and culture in which they live, how they view the the challenges that we're dealing with.
Yeah, for sure. I think, and 100%, I totally agree with what you're saying in terms of like, how do we deal with this as a community? Because the bottom line is like, just pushing it under the rug and ignoring it is clearly not working, and not validating it, and et cetera. And it's hard. It's definitely a tough balance for sure. Okay. So my first question is, when people talk about being gay, what do they usually mean? And what do they often mix together without realizing it?
Well, I don't really know the answer to the second part of the question. I would ask you more about what you're asking. But as far as the first part of the question, being gay means that you are not, that you are attracted not to the opposite sex. You are attracted to the same sex. So if you're a guy and you're attracted to other men, you're a woman and you're attracted to other women, that would fall into the category of gay.
Right.
What they might mean, I'm not sure what other things gay could mean.
So I'm thinking more, what comes to mind when I say what they might mix together without realizing it is maybe the concept of like, I had one homosexual experience in yeshiva. Does that make me gay? Like those types of questions.
Okay. Well, if a person is saying that they're gay, like if a person is saying, I
Oh
am
no, they're
gay,
not sure. They're not sure. They had one
okay,
homosexual
okay,
experience in yeshiva
right,
or seminary or whatever.
right. So, yeah, I think it's important to make that differentiation that having had one same-sex experience um, out of experimentation or curiosity, sometimes unfortunately not full consent, sometimes unfortunately under influence of drugs or alcohol. I mean, having an experimental type of relationship does not necessarily make you gay, for sure. I think that identifying as gay generally takes time, and it takes longer when you are also a faith-based person whose sexuality is dissonant with the rest of you. So it might take longer for you to accept and integrate yourself as a gay person. Mm. So when you're out as gay, you're gay. Like it's not really for someone else to question whether or not you really are.
Agreed. Um, do people always know their sexual orientation right away, or can it change or unfold over time?
Um, r- Look, I think that it's on a spectrum. I think that there are people who just know and they've always known. And as much as they've tried to even deny it or, try to engage in opposite sex relationships, it doesn't work for them. It's very, very clear. And then there are people that, it takes a while. It takes a while. And like I said, it's on a spectrum. So people can experiment with the opposite sex and find that they maybe have some amount of ability to engage on an intimate level, a sexual level, but in the end of the day, what you what you are and who you're attracted to is going to be something that, you need to feel. comfortable with. You need to accept what you choose to accept. If you choose to accept this about yourself and you choose to live your most authentic self, then I don't think I think that that spectrum is not there. There are going to be people who don't do that. There are going to be people who say, you know, I do feel attracted to women, or I do feel attracted to men, like whatever the same sex, but yet I'm unable to integrate that with other parts of myself. And I can't, I can't do that integration. I don't see any space for me to be to live with the same sex with the same sex partner. Married to the opposite sex partner. I want to have children in the most organic, natural way, and therefore I'm going to choose to try to live a straight life. Or some cases, I might choose to be aware of being queer or gay or I'm aware that I have this, and I'm also aware that I'm making a sacrifice. And I also, by the way, need to make my partner aware, because these situations can be devastating if there isn't full transparency going in.
Right. So it's interesting. I've gotten that question a lot actually, in both directions, women or men messaging me
Mhm.
saying like, I want to get married. I want to live a quote unquote normal life. I want to be able to have children. Um, how do I go about doing that? But I still have these feelings. So then, I mean, I think also bisexuality is a thing, obviously. Um, but it's almost like how I actually got a message like this literally last night. And I said, wait till tomorrow when I speak to Talli Rosenbaum about it. Um, just like this overarching feeling of same sex attraction, but I'm married and I'm attracted to my spouse, but I also like am strongly attracted to the same sex too. Like, how do you balance that incongruence for the person,
Well,
obviously?
yeah, for the person. It's very, very difficult, and things need to be named. And we have to be aware of what is. I think that most people will need to have some kind of therapeutic process. And what I want to say about therapy is this: I want to kind of make a cautionary statement about therapy. When you go to therapy to figure yourself out. You go to therapy to figure out who you are and what you want in life. And you go to figure out how to integrate the parts of your identity. It is often a very difficult process. It can involve mourning for the loss, whether it's mourning for the loss of ever being able to live your true authentic self, of wanting to be with if you're a man and you really want to be with a man and you can't because you won't allow that for yourself, or a woman who really wants to be with a woman and she just she's gay but she can't be because she doesn't feel that it is
Lines.
is it blends with her lifestyle. Then there's going to be a loss, and that needs to be. And even if she does end up, or he does end up coming out and becoming their authentic self, coming out of the closet and identifying as gay, there's still a process of mourning, because you're mourning what you would have wanted, which is to not have to have the struggle. You're working out possibly your anger at Hashem for making you this way. You're dealing with the, how to tell your parent, how to become accepted. Like there's a really lot of things you have to deal with. So what I want to say about therapy is that you want to make sure that you're going to the right therapist. And the right therapist, here are some red flags. The right therapist is somebody who does not say, you can change, you're not really gay, you're only same-sex attracted. And, if we do therapy, we can kind of rewire you into being attracted to the opposite sex. That's our agenda. But you also don't want to go to a therapist who's going to say, listen, it sounds like you're gay, and it's something that you're going to have to accept. Okay, let's affirm your gayness. Like that, because that's also an agenda. The agenda needs to be you, the person in therapy. You need to get to where you get to with support, with hand holding, with containing, not with somebody telling you what you are or aren't, or what you should do or shouldn't. You've just got to go through the steps.
It sounds like you're explaining the concept of conversion therapy. I've gotten that message too. Like, do you do conversion therapy? I'm like, no. That's not something that sex therapists believe in. Like, I don't believe that that's a thing. I don't, and people, and listen, there are definitely people out there saying that they can. I just think it's the most unethical thing ever. How do you make someone be something that they're not? I mean, what do you think about that?
I mean, I think that we know that there's tremendous damage that can get done. What happens is that people who follow an agenda-based program been shamed for their sexuality, shamed for their behavior, been pathologized, labeled as sex addicts.
Mhm.
And, what happens is that happen to have quite a few what's called mixed orientation couples. Some who got married anyway, did out on the side, right? Um, and some who, have a really hard time, some who, have denied it. Like there's all kinds of different scenarios. It makes it very, first of all, when you think about intimacy and relationships, what does it mean to be in an intimate relationship? When you're in an intimate relationship, you want some amount of symmetry regarding the way that we desire one another, the way that we are attracted. Working with a couple where, I was working with a couple, an older couple, beautiful woman, gorgeous woman, like, and her entire life, she never was zocha to get the feeling from her husband that she's a beautiful woman. Women's desire often thrives off of the way their husbands look at them. And, you know, the way their husbands, no matter what they're wearing, or with makeup, without makeup, a t-shirt, their husband, that gaze where, you're adorable, you're so cute, I love you. And let's, for him, it was like, oh, you want to have sex? Okay, let me just take my Viagra so that we can do it. Like there was
I
no
was gonna say you
vitality
don't see
there.
that in both directions. That like men also have that yearning for like their wife to look at them like, oh, you're so cute, I love you. Like,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely. Absolutely. But in this case, um, the man didn't have the yearning to get that from her.
right.
He did have a yearning, which he fulfilled in a way which, you know, is certainly not in accordance with Jewish values. And the thing about integrating Jewish values is when you think about it, um, if you're gay and you want to have a partner, and you want to live a life of Jewish values, let me put it this way. There was a time that there was, if you were gay, you were either going to be miserable, right, in a marriage where you kept it a secret and you just either acted out on the side or whatever, or didn't and was miserable, or went to these conversion therapies, but you stay true to being Jewish and how, or you didn't. You said, like, this is gadol alai, like my sexuality is who I am and I can't keep it oppressed, which must mean that I have to leave Judaism, which for many, many people, they didn't leave because they were rebelling or they found it to be oppressive. They left it very sadly because they did feel, people's sense of self, your sexual sense of self is so important to you. So your spiritual sense of you. And the idea that you have to give up one for the other, very, very, very difficult. So today, there's a lot more openness to people saying, look, I don't want to give up my relationship to Hashem and I don't want to give up my Jewish practice. I still want to daven and I still want to go to shul and I want to keep Shabbat and I want to keep kosher and I want to do all the mitzvot and I want to live an authentic Jewish life. Why should I give that up? The
It's
idea
interesting you
here
say
is
that.
that you can live in accordance with Jewish values with a same-sex partner almost in an easier way than living with an opposite sex partner. Certainly, if you're going to be non-monogamous on the side, certainly is not in accordance with Jewish values, right?
Right.
So, if you're living with a partner and you're living in a monogamous way in accordance to Jewish values, with integrity to halakha, and the truth is that nobody really knows what you're doing behind closed doors either, and nobody should be asking. So, you said we're not going to be talking about, the halachic aspect. You know, how you are wired is not a function of how you are wired. How you behave, the act that you do, those are. And you don't know what people are doing or not doing in the privacy of their own bed in the same way that you don't know what a heterosexual couple.
Right. So no, it's interesting that you're bringing up monogamy versus non-monogamy. Like it's interesting. Obviously, not obviously. I don't know if you're seeing it. I've seen tremendous amount clinically, um, definitely within the Jewish community that affairs are happening. People, why? And like there have been times where like these men are accepted to daven in a minyan and they're part of the community, and it's almost like not that having affairs is acceptable, but it's more accepted than something like homosexuality. Do you hear? Which like why is one worse than the other? They're both unacceptable. Like I don't like that part. Also is such a hard thing for me to connect with. Like, and I don't disagree with you in that if people can, they shouldn't have to sacrifice their sexuality for Torah, and they shouldn't have to give one or the other up in order to be like a soldier of Hashem or whatever. You know what I mean? I agree with you on that.
Look, I think that the idea here is that people need to be able to send compassion towards people who are gay. There are people who are gay that never get married from people. They never, ever get married. And they know that they're gay. They can't live with a person of the opposite sex, but they're also not going to live with a person of the same sex because it's against their values. And so they give up on, you know, any sort of marital life and any sort of um, intimate life. And I know a couple people like that.
Which
And
is
it's so
sad.
sad. We had on Intimate Judaism in one of our earlier seasons, we had Rabbi Benny Lau, very well-known rabbi. He's the Rav of, he did 929 and he was the Rav of the Ban Shul. And he's the nephew of the chief rabbi, Lau.
I know the name.
You know the name. Okay.
Yeah.
Not everybody in the yeshivish world or Orthodox world in America knows him, but,
Mhm.
he came on and he said, look, Oto liot adam levado is a tenet. Man is not supposed to be by himself. And it's very, very, very sad when you end up, and some people do feel very alone in their marriage if they marry somebody from the opposite. The person who they married feels very alone, very lonely. It's actually very tragic to know that you're gay and get married because you don't want to be, right? And not tell the person, and they don't understand what's going on. They gaslit. They feel like deprived of authentic intimacy. They can be good friends, they can get along, but it's not the same when you're married to somebody who has no real drive towards you. You're going to feel that. And that they'd rather be somewhere else with someone else. You're going to feel that. So it's a loss. Now, again, I don't want to, talk about I really don't like to talk about my couple. I can, I have examples and I am working now with a couple. It took time for her to actually acknowledge that, if she were not religious, it would be different. She didn't want to acknowledge that she was lesbian and, or that and even though she did have interactions, in, I'll say seminary with women. And, she really does love women. She really loves her husband as well, and her husband loves her. And they're really, really trying to make it work
So when you're
because
saying that,
they're very closely attached. They're very, very spiritual. These are not people that would ever consider acting out of the marriage. That's not an option, as opposed to some couples, they do. That's how they make it work. There's organizations for Haredi lesbians where they meet each other. They stay married because that's the only way to go. And they, kind of do what they have to do with their husbands, but they have, their relationships with each other and they get together and they're okay. So everyone kind of figures it out, but it's really, and it's not for me to judge and it's not for any of us to judge what people decide to do. It's just a question of, is there space for people to be able to be more true and authentic to themselves and to the environment?
Right, for sure.
And
Right.
that depends on the environment.
Hmm. It's interesting. And I've never heard that. I'm assuming that's in Israel. Maybe it is in New York. Maybe it is in the Haredi communities in America also. I've never heard that they've had these places where women can meet up and do what they need to
Support
do.
groups. No,
Yeah.
well, they're support groups. They're friends. I'm not, if
Yeah.
they couple, if they intimate relationships, they may not. I don't know. Again, I'm not, the situation is such that they don't have a choice.
Right. Right.
At this point, there's very little recognized gay relationships. You pay a big price. You pay a big price. And really, ideally, you shouldn't have to. You should not have to pay that price. You should be able to if you're Haredi and you're lesbian and you really identify as Haredi and you want to be that, you should be able to do that and send your kids to the schools that you want to send your kids to, and they shouldn't have to send the value system that you believe in. I mean, that's idealization. It doesn't really happen. Maybe it does in some places, but very, very difficult.
No, for sure.
A difficult situation.
Yeah. I want to ask you about the couple you were explaining before that you said like she really loves her husband, he really loves her. I'm assuming we're talking about love not in a sexual way.
He's very attracted to her. She's not, doesn't feel
She's
that
not
way about
attracted to him.
him.
Okay, that was my question.
So, for now, they're trying to make it work. At least we've been able to name it. He's been able to mourn relationships that she's not. He's kind of mourning, recognizing, he's, he calls it Mitsum Sam, like Tzimtzum, because they're mystical. But, I can't really say if it's going to end up
Or what's going
being
to happen.
systemic.
Right.
I don't know. I don't know.
How much do shame or fear influence how people experience their sexuality?
That's a huge question. And that applies to all orientations, to all sorts of fantasies and feelings, differences. I think that shame can be part of anybody's development, especially if shame is built in to development. And that really leads us to broader topics around the development of shame together with sexuality. Whether it's the ongoing conflict between the development of a sexual self and the fact one is prohibited from experiencing sexuality, not only with a partner, but to some extent with themselves, which is also part of sexual development. If you're a young man, and, you struggled with, I hate to say struggled with because it's like, you are curious about sex. You want to explore with yourself the way that young men do naturally, but at the same time, you're conflicted by being taught quite explicitly there's a prohibition, and there's no question that there is. The question is, how do you teach that prohibition? Do
Right.
you tell young men that every time they masturbate, they are, spilling the spirit of millions of potential human beings and that they are going to come to haunt you for the rest of your life? And as such, instill great shame and fear and trauma? Or do you tell young men that, it's very normal to want to do this? And the fact that you want to do this means that you're normal, you're developing normal. Them that you're developing normal because you're going to be able to have a family, you're going to be able to have a wife and you're going to want to, you know, be a sexual person and bring children into the world, like to turn that into something positive, that the that sexuality is a creative force. It's building, it's life, it's a life force. We want to take it seriously and we want to navigate it and we want to, regulate it. We want to regulate it. We want to regulate our sexual behavior. We don't want us to, here's where shame comes in. Shame comes in when we can't integrate our sexuality with the rest of us. I'm a frum person. I can't be sexual, especially if I'm not married. So what do? I watch hours of porn a day. And when I do it, I'm completely split up. I'm doing it, but I'm not really doing it. So what ends up happening is that there's an acting out of sexual behavior in a split way. So everything that has to do with sexuality is dark. It's associated with conflict, with guilt, with shame. And then it's very hard once you do get married, right? To be like, okay, you can be sexual now, no problem, have fun, because you're wired already to feel shame and guilt.
Right.
You really, it's very difficult to, you know, um, rewire. If you understand, the neurophysiology of anxiety and of trauma, you almost view sexual arousal as a threat. And, that's the amygdala. That's your threat center saying, oh, alarm, alarm, alarm. I'm getting aroused. Something bad's going to happen. Something bad being, I'm going to end up ejaculating and then I'm going to feel really, really, really bad. And, that makes sexuality bad. That makes my sexuality bad. And this can happen with homosexuality as well, where you're living a life that this side of you is this deep, dark, shameful secret. And it can't really be you because then you can't be the rest of yourself. You can't be an avrech. You can't be, yeshiva bacher. You can't be a rabbi. You can't be those things because you're that. So that becomes all wrapped up, and it can be labeled as addiction or, well, something that's magical, something you can't control. And it is something that you can't control. That's the danger of not being authentic and integrated with a sexuality that is yours, that is true to yourself and true to your beliefs.
And then trying to balance that, again, what you shared, being told your whole life, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, but then you feel this way, like trying to balance that in and of itself is like traumatic.
Yeah, yeah, it is. It's very, very hard. But like I said, I think that once, who is it that's important in your life growing up? Your friends, your educators, your parents. So if your educators are saying, I remember I had a Navi teacher in like the seventh and eighth grade, and he used to literally say that the reason why there's so much smog in San Francisco is because of all the homosexuals who live there. Okay. Like, that's what he used to say. I'm not going to say his name, but if any of you grew up where I grew up, you'll know what I'm talking about. You'll know who I'm talking about. It was just like very common that homosexuals were terrible people. Okay, so granted, there's also the 80s and AIDS, and I mean, this was when I was growing up, was really still only the 70s. But I think that when you have educators who are saying very negative things about homosexuality, you have friends who are using the word homo as a slur, right? Um, you have parents who might be saying negative or derogatory things. How are you going to feel okay with feeling attracted to the same sex when you have that backdrop of
Right.
complete lack of compassion, complete othering, complete, this doesn't happen by us.
Right. For sure.
So, when we create an environment where, you know, we understand that there's going to be a percentage, and when teachers begin to speak with more sensitivity about the subject, and again, this doesn't have to negate halakha, still halakha will always be. And nobody's saying to change that. But who are we to change that?
Right.
That's not changeable. Um, what is changeable is how we relate to one another, because there's no halacha to use the word homo as a slur.
Right. For sure.
And there are halachot mandate us to act with others with respect and with compassion.
Right.
People, people without judgment.
Yes. Can anxiety, stress, or past experiences shape what someone is turned on by?
Absolutely. Great question. Yeah, absolutely. You know, anxiety, what happens is the combination of anxiety and stress and experiences can create almost an obsession, or what you might have heard learning sex therapy as a fetish. So, uh, having had experiences that wired in, and you might find that you are a person that happens to with other things in your life now. You learned how to do something first time and you can't do it any other way. Like you just get stuck in a very rigid pattern. I will see people in my practice, and this is why it's so important not to have an agenda and not to tell people that they're not gay, but also not to tell people that they are gay. Because I've had people in my practice who kind of thought they were gay, and they engaged in a lot of obsession. So I had somebody who said, I think I might be gay because this happened. And, for a moment I was aroused. And now it must mean that I'm gay, or it must mean that I'm, like, just because they don't have a filter that says to them, because you were aroused by something doesn't mean you're gay. So, and then they get very caught in that, and, and they overthink it, but they're not really, it's really about obsessing, not really about a sex. And so that's why good therapy can kind of weed that out. Yes, that can happen. And when you assess a person's sexuality, you also assess their sexual development, their capacity for intimacy, their capacity for relationships. A lot of times somebody might come in and say, I think I might be asexual. And asexuality is very much appreciated by the sex therapy community as being a legitimate orientation. Okay? Mm, And the truth is that for people who are wired asexual, it is a legitimate orientation. But there are a lot of people who think they are and they're not.
Right.
They're not. They just haven't developed yet. They just, they haven't really thought about it. They might, there might be different aspects to how they connect to people, or their attachment style, mm, or the fact that intimacy skills, even if you look at culture, you're going to see a lot more asexuality because we're looking at a lot less intimacy. We're looking at a lot more interaction with technology, a lot more, going to the AI chat box rather than to your friend. So, I think that recognizing that there, intimacy skills and being human and being connected with humans, what develops your ability to connect with others, your desire to connect with others. Attachment is a very important part of developing sexuality, healthy and safe attachments. Having traumatic experiences definitely affects connection. Especially if you had a traumatic with somebody who is meant to take care of you, love you, and yet they hurt you in that way, will make you very anxious about sex. Is sex a place where somebody wants to use me, or is sex a place of real true connection? So understanding that sexual orientation is one aspect of sexuality, but sexuality is the development of the sexual is very complicated. There are many, many variables that go into healthy sexuality. It's not black and white. not binary. It's not, you know, gay or straight for the most part. I mean, some people are, but I think that it's kind of weaving in your experiences, thoughts, feelings, your attachment styles, the connections that you've had, your body image, your ability to enjoy pleasure, sensations, good smells. These are all messages that you get. Your autonomy. Were you granted autonomy from decision making? Your own body? Or were you shamed? Were you shamed about your body? Were you shamed about how you dress? Were you shamed about your behavior? This will affect your sense of self and consequently as well, your sexual sense of self. So what's more important than who you're attracted to is who you are, who you are sexually, who you are as a human being who connects. And then the next step is who you're attracted to.
Right. How do you help without pushing someone in one direction or another?
Are you ask, if you're asking me as a therapist,
Yeah, as a
right,
therapist.
it's about staying very, very curious. Really, first of all, being there like you would be there for anybody who has experienced anything distressful, you know, having a safe space for that person about what their feelings are. There's often like a developmental process in the therapy, often denial, it, and then anger, anger itself, anger at God, anger, and then there's sometimes grief, eventually acceptance. So you would want to be there, them, the way that you would be in any kind of therapy room where you're not pushing agendas. You're not, you're
Your
really
personal opinion
just,
doesn't really matter ever in the therapy room. I feel that
yeah,
way
I
too.
mean, look, if some people might be looking for like a gay activist. I think that people may be activists, therapists may be activists about different things, but not when you're in the room. You're not an activist when you're in the therapy room with your client. And you're with therapy where it's their agenda, not yours. You're a mirror to them. You're mirroring them, you're reflecting on what they're saying, you're helping them figure it out. And you're also helping them feel like it can be safe to be authentic. But also, recognizing when it's very challenging to be authentic. There's also a price to pay. People who are religious, who come out of the closet, will encounter negative feedback. And, many of them many of them are terrified about it.
Right.
And, it's not easy. And I think that we want to be able to really just, it's not about being liberal. It's not about being woke. It's really not. It's about being compassionate. And I think that that's an important Jewish value, at least the way I was raised.
Yeah, I fully agree with you. Being that I know that you work with couples that struggle with this, what tends to be the hardest for couples when one partner has a same-sex attraction?
Okay, so you know, it depends. I don't know if I could say that there's one thing, but I really think that the hardest thing is depending on how you're navigating it. I've seen couples navigate it in a way that's not so healthy, considering it like an addiction that has to be monitored all the time. And that leads to failure and falling off the wagon and acting out. Mm, I think that the hardest thing probably is for the partner, for the straight partner, who very much be wanted and doesn't feel wanted throughout the entire they feel wanted, even though there's, there may be friendship, there may be companionship, there may be fun times together, they may have shared values and like the same movies, but it's not the same thing. you're missing out on something very critical. You're missing out on vitality of feeling wanted. That's really hard for the partner. I think that for the gay person in a straight marriage, there's the loss, what I've given up, and it not being always sufficiently acknowledged. An ongoing sacrifice to not be with the person who you would want to be with, you know, like think about, if you had to be married to a woman and you like men and you couldn't be with a man, it's there's something that doesn't feel complete. And it's actually ironic because the very religious couples, and I'm not talking about Haredi versus, it happens to be that, this one couple that are really spiritual, or Dati Lumi, and have a Hasidic couple where they do things on the side. So it's not, there's no judgment there. I'm just saying that when you're really spiritual and you don't see any other way, um, it, it's very hard to live your life that way. Very, very difficult.
Right.
And you feel a lot of compassion. And by
So
the way, about the sex itself, I just want to say the sex itself can be associative. Over time, it can be traumatic. You don't feel like your partner's there with you. Right. So what I started to say, I have this, is that I was talking about doesn't feel shalem. It's ironic because a couple that want to be together as man and wife keep talking about how they're working towards shlemut. Because for them, shlemut is a man and a woman.
right, that's what they
But
right.
yeah, it's kind of like an ongoing sort of
Right.
difficulty and frustration.
So I'm also wondering, you mentioned it before, so I'm going to assume it's happened more than once where you've been in situations where you help one spouse in a couple that does identify as same sex, as homosexual or same sex attraction. How do you help them share these things honestly with their spouse? And I'm sure it goes in either direction, by the way. It could be the man or the wife, without blowing up their whole relationship. Oh my gosh, I can't believe this. We're getting divorced. We're done.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So first of all, let's just backtrack and say that part of the process for homosexual teens or young adults is disclosure to their parent. It's also something that require. I don't do that so much, but
Mhm.
therapists who do that, work with recognizing that, you know, they say that when the kid comes out of the closet into the closet, you have to be able to allow your parents their process. That they will have grief, that they will go through this
Right? What was supposed to
the
be, what
feelings.
was right
Yeah, yeah. The grief.
supposed to be,
I
whatever.
love my child, but I'm going to grieve now for the fact that this child's not gonna make that wedding or that wedding. I might make a different type of wedding. It's a process, for parents, for Orthodox parents, gay kids, a real process. And there are lots of support groups these days, and therapists working with um, parents like that. But you were talking about couples, so if we're doing a couples therapy process, or individual wants to come, if we're in a therapy process, it usually kind of unravels in the process. It's very important to recognize that the um, the straight partner will, having not known about this, experience betrayal, extreme feelings of betrayal. And, we have to be able to be there for both partners because it's very vulnerable to expose. And of course, they very much hoping for, understanding. And the partner who has been betrayed, can feel a great deal of anxiety and hypervigilance. As a matter of fact, like this older couple that I touched on, there was a beautiful moment in the course of the therapy. He had a great deal of shame. He would like go to bars and hook up with gay guys, and she went to like, you know, like anonymous families, and she did was all in the 12 steps, and that he's got to start every day and not go off the wagon. But she was very hyper vigilant. She knew he was doing this. Phone, she would follow him around, and she really, we talked about in therapy what it means for her that he sleeps with men. That was really very ignored in all the years of therapy that they had. There was really never discussion about the fact that he's going and sleeping with men. What does that mean to you? Well, that means he's sick, diseased. It took a while, and there was finally like a breakthrough session. And I think that in some way or another, this happens with almost every couple I work with, that there's a breakthrough session where he was able to really cry about, his process of being homosexual. He's always known it, and how he's always been ashamed of it, and how hard it's been for him, how much he's wanted to, be married and have, and, she was able to show real compassion. In almost every case, when there's been a disclosure, there's a lot of relief because a lot of times, the partner feels like completely gaslit. They don't know what's going on. They don't understand it. And when you can put it into words and say, well, that's because, she's a lesbian or he's gay, or, this is what it means. And, that it's hard to face the truth. It could create, a lot of new ways of thinking and options, and that's scary for everyone, right? But it does create relief. Something seems to now make sense.
Interesting.
It's hard to swallow, but I think that keeping it in the down low, or, keeping it oppressed or repressed, thinking about it, or shoving it under the carpet, or having it a sex addiction, same-sex attraction when the person is actually homosexual, whatever, like it doesn't really help in the end.
Right. Like just call it
We
what it
have to,
is.
well, you know what they say in therapy, you have to name it to tame it. You got to know what you're, it's, and that's how it is. You got to put it out there on the table. You got to do it in the right way, at the right time, the right setting. Very important. Um, the right window of tolerance, not in the middle of a fight, not, dissociated. Like it has to be, partners are in their window of tolerance, they're regulated, they're calm, they can talk about it. And they can talk about it with validating, empathy, dignity. It doesn't have to be chaotic. It doesn't have to be messy. And maybe it will be messy, but then we clean up the mess.
So just one final question. What does a healthy outcome look like when someone is trying to make sense of their sexuality?
I think that at the end of the day, you feel like you are authentic, makes sense to you, who you are, who you're attracted. If it is homosexuality, if it is on the LGBT spectrum, it's healthy whether or not you choose to, but if you do choose to integrate it with your spiritual values and you feel entitled to, I think that's also, I think that the principles of sexual health and relational health apply regardless of orientation. So you are navigating your relationship, intimate relationship with mutual consent, with, ensuring reproductive health and birth control when necessary, and also not spreading any diseases. I mean, the basic um, regard that you have for values and your own values, whether they are monogamy or not judging anyone's values. I think as religious Jews, we do value monogamy, and we do value um, consent in relationship. We also value, would say, respect. We don't value taking advantage of other people. coercing people. So those things apply. Those are healthy sexuality principles, regardless of orientation.
Holly, this was amazing. Thank you
Thank
so much
you.
for joining me and answering my questions, answering everyone's
You're
questions, to be
welcome.
honest with you. These are the questions that I am constantly getting. And I think the bottom line
Great.
here is compassion. I think that's the bottom line here. Having some compassion for
Compassion.
people. Yeah,
And also not gaslighting, not telling them they're really not gay. You can fix them. Um, that doesn't mean you can't go through a process and help them figure themselves.
right. But that's not trying
And
to
that's
convince
not
them
conversion
they're not
therapy
gay.
either. Yeah.
Correct.
You're allowed to do therapy. This whole, also this thing of against conversion therapy. I mean, it's like, it's hard to navigate. It's hard to tell what people do in their therapy room. Mm, You know, it shouldn't go either way. You shouldn't be telling people who they should be attracted to. I think you want to be there to be their container and their mirror and do the process that you do as a therapist.
Thank you so much for joining. This was
Very
so special
welcome.
and amazing for me as somebody
Well,
who's
good
studying
luck on
clinical
your
sexuality.
podcast.
Thank you so
And
much.
you're new to the podcasting. Intimate Judaism has been around for like 8 seasons already.
Mhm.
So
I got to go
please
check it out.
having podcasts, yeah, please check out Intimate Judaism.
Yeah,
Um,
everyone should.
it's
It's
just
great.
to be, yeah, everyone should if you like to listen to podcasts about intimacy and
Yeah,
Judaism and sexuality, and from a halachic lens and lens of Jewish values. I think it's a conversation should be had. Everything from mishpacha to shmirat negiah to all the issues. There are a lot of issues, and people are starting to talk about them, and I think it's great.
yeah. Baruch Hashem, starting to get out there more, and people are starting because again, then you get to that concept of everybody just feeling like they're the only one dealing with it when really we're all in the same boat.
You're not alone.
Exactly. Perfect. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you for your time. Okay, we'll be in touch.
Okay, great.
Perfect.
Bye.
Great. Bye.